Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, and government leaders. We meet each one to one. What could be more timeless or timely than the way we approach the inevitable, death? Jane Brody, the longtime personal health columnist for the New York Times, has chosen this subject for her latest book, Jane Brody's Guide to the Great Beyond, a practical primer to help you and your loved ones prepare medically, legally, and emotionally for the end of life. It's just been published by Random House. Welcome.
Thank you, Sheryl.
Jane, your personal health column is all about staying healthy. So what made you decide to write a book about preparing for death?
Well, I've always written about life, the beginning of life, the middle of life, and now what about the end of life? It is all on a continuum, and it's as important for people to be ready for the end of life as it is at the beginning. Not just for the person who is dying, but for their family, for their friends, their survivors who have issues that need to be resolved before somebody dies.
Now, in your book, you talk about the deaths of your mother, your mother-in-law,
Friends.
other friends. Did these stories inspire what you wanted to say in the book?
It's very interesting because my mother died just shy of my 17th birthday. I was graduating from high school. I feel like she missed most of my life, which she did. She missed most of my life, but I missed most of her life, too. And so I've been thinking about these issues for a very, very long time. It took me a year to mourn her loss. I was so fixated on helping my family get through this horrible experience and adjusting to college, where I ran off shortly after she died, that I couldn't stop long enough. I couldn't stop the train long enough to get off and cry. It took a whole year. So I've been thinking about this for a very long time, and now that I'm getting older and people around me, friends, people that I've known for many years, people I have just recently met who are my age or even younger than I am, have died or are dying, and I realize that some people die well and some people don't, and that there is a very important difference, and there are very important lessons to be learned from those who die well.
Now, one of the main, and we'll talk about that later, but one of the main themes is that each of us needs to prepare for his or her own death. At what stage of life should one start preparing, and what are the basic things that one needs to do?
Well, you start preparing as soon as you reach the age of majority. Now, it's really, really hard to get an 18-year-old person to come to terms with the possibility that their life may one day come to an end and that they should be ready for it no matter when it comes. And my philosophy of life is live each day as if it might be your last. But prepare for the future.
Right.
Don't anticipate a dreadful ending. But certainly, as soon as you reach the age of majority, you have the legal means to set your affairs in order and to make sure that whatever it is that you may be leaving behind, whether it's life lessons, whether it's a message that you want to get to people whom you love, that's in place. And the thing that really brought this to a head was Terri Schiavo, the 26-year-old woman who suffered a heart attack and was without oxygen long enough to have damaged the cognitive portion of her brain so that she was actually a living vegetable. She had, she could breathe and her heart could go, but she had no mind.
And then this is battle between her husband and her parents about what to do.
15 years.
Right.
15 years of battle about disconnecting her feeding tube. And in the end, when they finally did disconnect it, who paid for those 15 years? And what anguish did this cause her survivors?
And how could she have avoided that?
She could have avoided it if she had, for example, sat down with her husband when they got married and said, would you be willing to be my healthcare proxy? Would you be willing to tell the doctors what I would want if I can't speak for myself under various circumstances? And this is what needs to get done.
Okay.
I mean, we talk about living wills, but in New York State, for example, a living will is not a legal document. It does express what you want to be done under various circumstances. And in my book, I have an entire chapter on these advance directives and how to prepare them so that the doctors can understand what it is that you want.
But a healthcare proxy is better, is more effective?
The healthcare proxy is an essential, because the healthcare proxy is you when you can't speak for yourself.
Okay.
So that, let's say her husband had been her healthcare proxy. She trusted him to say to the doctors, this is what I would or would not want under these kinds of circumstances. He could have ended that legal battle in a heartbeat, simply by saying she would never want to live this way. She has told me, see, here is her living will. We've had this discussion. Here is her signed healthcare proxy witnessed by 2 people.
Right.
And they have to then abide to those wishes.
So the healthcare proxy is one thing. Obviously, a will.
A will leaves, everybody knows about wills, because wills take into account what assets you may have that you want to leave behind. And they can come in many different forms. You may not have any money, but you may have some property that's interesting, that might be interesting to some survivor.
Right.
You might want to leave some kind of legacy to a charity. There are many ways of leaving wills, and everybody knows about that.
Right.
But what they don't understand is this living will, which says, when do I want resuscitative treatment and when do I not want it?
The book is also about preparing for the death of a loved one who may be elderly or who may have a terminal illness. Who seems to have more problems with facing the reality of death and preparing for it? Is it the person who's dying or the person's loved ones?
It really depends, and I've seen both things happen. For example, I tell a story about the father of a physician. He's a Westchester physician, and he happens to be an end-of-life specialist. But his father refused to accept the fact that he was dying of lung cancer. And as much as the doctor tried to get his father on the same page as he was, knowing that his father was really dying, he couldn't do it. And he finally had to come to terms with the fact that, let's just humor him. Let's just say, okay, Dad, when you get out of here, we'll go to Sicily together. Whatever it is that that person wanted. You really need to take your cues from the person who's dying.
Okay.
So sometimes it's the person who's dying who has the most trouble, and more often, however, it is the survivors. It is the person who says, Mom, don't give up. Don't give up. You're giving up. When Mom knows that she's run out of steam, that the treatments are not working, that the quality of her life is so deteriorated that she does not want to continue it any longer. And I think we need to accept that as well.
And you do write about the importance of listening to the dying person's wishes.
Absolutely. And the dying person very often, and give the dying person the chance to express those wishes and not shut them up at the sound.
And that's what happened with your mother,
yes.
Didn't you say?
Yes. Well, this was 1958. And in 1958, nobody used the C word, let alone the D word. Nobody talked about cancer and nobody talked about death. And we certainly fell into that same trap. And as a result, this beautiful, vibrant, intelligent woman was never able to say goodbye. And we were never able to say goodbye to her. And especially traumatic for my brother, who was at the time just turning 13. And he didn't even realize that she was dying. In those days, children weren't allowed to go up into the hospital even. So he never saw her at the end of her life. And I think it was extraordinarily traumatic for him especially. But twice my mother tried to end her life because she knew she was dying.
Right.
One time she slit her wrists. She was rescued. Another time she drank rubbing alcohol. She was rescued. Neither occasion was used to have that critical conversation that would have helped to relieve her depression and her consternation about her fate, and given her an opportunity to express what was really on her mind. What was she leaving behind? What did she want us to know? What did we want her to know? That we loved her and we're going to miss her, and we're certainly going to miss the years of life that without her that we might have otherwise enjoyed. And I say to many people, I said, the thing that I think I missed one of the very most of all was her recipes that I never got to get. I was only 16. I never got to get the recipes of the dishes that she cooked so well.
Because you all were all in denial about the fact that she was dying?
Absolutely. We never dawned on us to ask that question. Mom, how do you make that stuffed cabbage? How do you make your lamb stew? I mean, all the things that were so special in our family.
Right.
And she was a good cook.
Right.
I mean, she was a working woman, but boy, when she put her nose to that grindstone, she really turned out some delicious
my mother's
things.
88. I've been collecting her recipes for years.
Good for you. And I've spent the last 50 years trying to recreate them based on how I remembered they tasted.
You say doctors often don't know how to behave when their patients are dying. They sometimes don't tell the patient or the family that they are dying, and they sometimes abandon the dying patient once they can't do anything more for them.
This is the saddest thing of all, and it's especially sad when the patient has had a long-time relationship with a doctor, and now the treatments aren't working any longer. Maybe the patient has elected or the doctor has suggested that you go into hospice. Never hears from that doctor again. It's as if, okay, you're dead now. We're not not weeks, months, or whatever from now, but goodbye. I'm out of here.
On to the next patient.
And doctors will justify this by saying, well, I have to devote my time and energy to the living. I can't deal with the dying. But as I mentioned at the beginning, dying is just a part of living, and physicians have an obligation, a responsibility to be there for patients when they're dying as much as they are there for patients when they have hopes of keeping them alive.
And hopefully, I mean, we would hope medical schools would be teaching them more about that, are they?
Unfortunately, they're not.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're not. And it's especially challenging for the physicians who deal with life and death issues all the time. The physicians, for example, oncologists, the cancer doctors.
Right.
They are schooled like a horse with blinders on to get that patient well. And if you can't get them well, at least keep them going for as long as humanly possible.
Right.
And when that isn't working any longer, they have no script.
They check out.
They have no script, so they go off stage. And that's really a horrible experience for the patient.
Right.
And one of my friends, he had a very short-term illness. I mean, his cancer was diagnosed in April, and he was dead in actually, it was diagnosed in June. His first symptoms occurred in April, diagnosed in June, dead in September. So he didn't have any long-term relationship with the doctor. But when the doctor who was his primary caretaker, primary oncologist, had no more weapons in his arsenal, he sent in an underling to say, well, there's nothing more we can do for you.
Wow.
I mean, it's like saying, okay, now you can die.
Wow.
And never was that primary doctor seen again. Not only wasn't he seen, he never made a phone call. He never even sent a note or anything to the spouse.
Family. Yeah.
Nothing. And it was devastating.
Yeah.
Truly devastating.
Wow.
What the doctor could have said was, I tried my best. I'm sorry it didn't work out better. You've been a great patient.
Right. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more with personal health columnist Jane Brody, author of Jane Brody's Guide to the Great Beyond. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Jane Brody, whose latest book, Jane Brody's Guide to the Great Beyond, addresses the issues we all face. Hospice care is something, I had certainly been hearing about for years, but one thing I learned from your book is that one can have hospice care services at home.
Oh, yes.
Now, how does that work, and can anybody get it, and can anybody pay for it?
In fact, hospice care at home is more common than hospice care in a facility because there aren't that many facilities available, but there are hospice workers who can not only come into your home, but can even come into a nursing home in many cases and help a patient at the end of life. The thing about hospice is everybody who has been through this experience has the same report. It has made it so much easier. They have explained to us exactly what's going to happen and what we're supposed to do when it happens. They've been there when we need help in the middle of the night. It's made the end-of-life experience almost as comfortable and joyful as the beginning-of-life experience for so many people. And instead of leaving behind this anguish and pain, which is inevitable when you lose somebody you love, it is overcolored with roses. That feeling that somebody there was there for you, held your hand through the experience, and it made it more beautiful than it might otherwise have been.
Now, how do you get hospice care at home? How do you?
Well, there are agencies that provide it all over. I mean, like the visiting nurse service, for example. But every hospital knows how to contact hospice care. And the social worker at the hospital will make those connections. And
does Medicare pay for it?
Medicare pays for it, and most insurance companies also pay for it.
Okay.
But Medicare pays for it completely. This is really free care. It is really free care. And it takes the burden off our medical care system when people are really at the end of their lives, where expensive treatments make no sense. And expensive interventions make no sense. I mean, when somebody is dying, you don't put them on respirators and feeding tubes and put them in a hospital at great expense. And in fact, if our president would do one thing to reduce the costs of our medical care system, it would be to reduce the cost of care during the last week of life. Every doctor knows that it's the last week of life. And yet, they can't quite give up. They can't quite say, I'm not going to connect this tube.
And the basic requirements for hospice care are that, your doctor certified that you have no more than 6 months to live, right? And that there be a primary caretaker in the home.
Exactly. In the home, if you have hospice care at home, there has to be somebody there who is responsible for the patient. If you go into a facility that provides hospice care, then you do not need that primary caretaker. But the certification, I mean, the doctor says this patient is unlikely to live longer than 6 months. It's a prognosis. It's not a prediction. For example, I tell the story about Art Buchwald, who was that great humorist, columnist in Washington, D.C., who checked himself into hospice in Washington. He had kidney failure, and he did not want to spend any more time on a kidney machine. So he said, I'm 80-odd years old, and I've had it, and I'm just going to go into hospice and let nature take its course. Well, at 5.5 months, he was fine. He checked himself out of hospice.
And writes a book quickly.
Exactly. He checked himself out of hospice, and he wrote this charming book, Too Soon to Say Goodbye, about his experience with hospice. And it really was so delicious because it spells out exactly what all hospice can do for the patient and for the patient survivors.
Regarding funerals and funeral expenses, I've always been of the mind that observant Jews have got it right. They put the body in a pine box, not in a $3,000, $4,000 casket. They bury them within 24 hours. They have a set period for grieving. They have it right.
Well, in some ways, yes, and in other ways, no. For example, My sons don't believe in taking up space, and neither do I.
Even in a pine box.
Even in a pine box. You know, there are beautiful cemeteries. I live not far from Greenwood Cemetery, the first secular cemetery in New York, in Brooklyn. And it's a beautiful place to just walk through and read the old tombstones. But yet it takes up a very huge section of the neighborhood. If you think of it as a park, fine, but as a cemetery, it doesn't appeal to me. My son's idea is to be useful after they're dead. Mm-hmm. And they did a little homework and encouraged me to do the same homework. And we have discovered that the cheapest way to die is to donate your body to a medical school.
Right, right.
Now, medical students really need those bodies. Every incoming medical student in the first year of medical school has his own cadaver to study the internal workings of the human body. And every year, more students come through and they all need those cadavers. Right. The medical school, if you set this up in advance, the medical school takes care of everything. They'll pick up the body from wherever it lands and use it for as long as they need it. And they also, not only do medical students learn from it, but very often practicing physicians will test new techniques on a cadaver and learn how to do certain procedures that they wouldn't ever dare to try on a living person.
And then what do they do with the body?
And then when they're all through, the remains are cremated, and they can be returned to the survivors if they want them, or the remains can be scattered wherever the person wants.
And that's what is that what you're going to do as well?
That's what I want to do as well.
I hope there's nobody from Albert Einstein Medical School camped out your door, you know.
Nobody is. And the interesting thing is that my son, who lives in New York, checked out websites for the local medical schools and couldn't find any reference to how to donate a body. And when we asked about this, I found out that they don't like to put the whole idea of bodies on their official website. They're afraid of scaring people off.
Right.
But in fact, it would be a very valuable asset, and every medical school has the forms available for you to fill out. And the important thing to remember, which I didn't know at the time I wrote this book, but I've since learned, is that once you're dead, you have no rights to your body. So the important thing is, if you want to make this kind of donation, that your survivors are on the same page.
Right.
That they agree that this is the way they want to end, your life to end.
What do you consider a good death?
Well, a good death is defined differently by different people. And for some people, a good death is a very peaceful one. I mean, for example, my mother-in-law had been treated for cancer 4 years earlier. And while her recurrence was never officially diagnosed, it was quite obvious that her cancer had recurred. And she had decided that when something happens, that she doesn't want anything to be done. And so one day she started bleeding rectally. She called 911. They took her to the local community hospital. She had the presence of mind to grab her living will on the way to the hospital and said to the incoming people, to the intake people, I do not want any heroic measures. Just keep me comfortable.
Right.
And so a DNR was put on her door, do not resuscitate. The family was called. Her minister was there. She was dead in 12 hours. She was never in pain. She was conscious almost the entire time. Her minister said afterward he has never seen, in all his years of ministering, a more peaceful death. For her, she defined how she wanted to die.
Right.
That was her good death. Now, there are people who will rant and rave and scream and carry on and say, I'm not leaving here.
Right.
And to them,
will go not gently.
Will not go gently into that good night. And that's okay too. If that's if that's been your lifestyle, that's probably going to be your dying style. But you never know. And I think we need to take our cues from the people who are dying, how they wish to go out.
Did researching and writing this book change your own attitude about your own life and about dealing with death?
Well, it sort of crystallized things in a way that hadn't been so firmly entrenched prior to the time. And I feel I've always, ever since my mother died, I have lived each day as if it was my last. I have not wasted time. I have not spent a lot of time fretting over things I couldn't do anything about. So I have lived a full life, and I've enjoyed it. And I have enjoyed my children and my grandchildren, and I say, you know, I could leave this studio and be run over by a New York City taxi cab. And if that's how I have to go out, I am ready to do it. Mm-hmm. So I think that what researching this book has done for me is it's made me much more comfortable with accepting the fact that my life will end at some point. It may end tomorrow. It may end 20 years from now. You know, I'll be 68 years old very soon, and you know, I'd like to make it to 100. It would be a nice thing. My 8-year-old grandson asked me a couple of months ago, "Grandma, will you still be alive when I get married?" And I said, "Tomas, just get married young." I said, "I'd love to be alive at your wedding, and I'd love to be dancing at your wedding. But you never know. I'll do my best. Mm-hmm. I'll do my best, but you never know."
I think it's a great attitude, and I think a lot of really helpful. Your book, I think, really helps to people to crystallize their ideas about
and
living
start
and dying.
That essential conversation.
Right.
That essential conversation. Let's not be so afraid of this word, because what is really bad is when people ignore it until it's too late.
Right. Right.
And that's the most painful experience.
Right. We're out of time, but I want to thank Jane Brody for joining us today. Jane Brody's Guide to the Great Beyond, a practical primer to help you and your loved ones prepare medically, legally, and emotionally for the end of life, has just been published by Random House. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.